This is a powerful transmission around understanding your patterns, why you get stuck, and the important role that you play in not just creating them, but in healing them. Within this transmission, I explain to you what this is all about, how to move through your patterns, how to shift them for good, and find greater power on your path. Enjoy. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the channel. I'm doing this very special thing where I am attempting to post a video every day for a month for 30 days, 30-ish days, with the hopes that I just get into a more consistent flow in sharing important pieces, important truths, important messages, and transmissions that want to come through. So welcome. I believe this is day 4. We're at the beginning, but this is what it means to create a new pattern for ourselves. And patterns are what we're going to be talking about today. There was a really important message that wanted to come through when I was out on my run today. It's pouring rain. Otherwise, I probably would have just videoed while I was out on my run. You know, there's this important piece when it comes to understanding your patterns that show up in your life. And as I said in the intro, this might be triggering for some people because what is involved, first and foremost, in shifting our patterns and really shifting into a new reality, into a new experience for yourself, is first and foremost recognizing and accepting and embracing and getting curious with how you actually create these patterns, even the ones, especially the ones that are uncomfortable, out of habit and out of familiarity, because they are connected to something that you have experienced often when you were really young. So this might be triggering for some people because there is an invitation here for you to take full ownership of what is showing up in your life. This doesn't mean that people do not do hurtful things in your life or that you have been hurt by others. But what we're really learning how to do in this process, this is for real, like deep codes that are coming through with this piece, codes that I have really began to get curious with and understand and learn how to embody in my life that have allowed for such greater freedom. Because what is required when we take ownership of our patterns is a dismantling of the victim story. And it can be really easy for us to say, oh, I'm not a victim. I don't play the victim. But there is actually truth in that. Sometimes in our deepest patterns, in our greatest patterns, greatest being the biggest patterns, there is this story looping of being a victim to something, to someone else's actions. And again, you know, don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that people don't do things that are hurtful to you in your life. But it is so important, and there's so much freedom found in recognizing that within these things that show up continuously for you, there is a pattern going on. And within that pattern is a very important role that you play in co-creating that pattern over and over again in your life. And so let's dig in, because we have to understand why our patterns show up in order to be able to understand how to shift them. If there is something, and often we have our greatest patterns, our hardest patterns in relationship, that's also where we have the opportunity to heal them the most. So we're going to come back to that piece. If there is something that is looping, that is showing up again and again and again in your life, that feels cyclical, that feels like kind of like you're in the hamster wheel, you can't get out, or you're spinning your wheels, you can't figure it out, this is a pattern, okay? And it's really important to understand that your patterns that you get stuck in, they've started somewhere. They were created often when you were really young, and there will most likely be pain or something that is unprocessed within you that is causing the cyclical experience. Also really important to understand that your system is so intelligent. And so whenever we're in a pattern, this is always showing us that there is a part of us, or maybe a lot of us, a lot of parts that are wanting to heal through this experience, even if it's really painful. That's how intelligent our system is, because what's occurring when we're stuck in these patterns is that there is familiar energy that's showing up again. And part of that familiar energy is your system calling that piece in, calling that situation or relationship or dynamic or experience in to complete the cycle. Otherwise, it wouldn't keep happening. And so it becomes so important for you to get curious with the origins. Where did this start? And that's where you might have to spend some time getting curious, sitting down, reflecting, spending some time creating space, getting to know, where did this start? Where did this begin? When is the first time that I remember experiencing this? Patterns are historical, okay? They're in our system. And the energy, yes, it's trying to complete this cycle that wasn't completed then. Because often if it was a lot of pain that we experienced, it will, I like to think of it as like our system takes a snapshot of the experience if we can't process it, and then stores it. And then we will recreate similar experiences so that we can heal through it. And so what can be so helpful is actually going back to, where did this begin? Where did this start? And starting to understand how old you were. What were the circumstances? Who were the people involved? What was the energy that you experienced? How might have you felt like a victim then? Or how did you feel like a victim then? Because we also don't want to invalidate, when I bring up this victim piece, so much compassion for ourselves, because these are big experiences that we will have had often when we were very young. And so we want to be able to hold these pieces, these parts within us with so much compassion, so much love, so much patience. But we also want to show that younger version of us that it's time to move out of this, that it's time to create a new pattern, that it's time to create a new story, to tell ourselves a new story. And here's the other important thing when it comes to patterns. There's so many important things. It is serving a purpose. So not only is this showing up again for the cycle to be completed, and we're going to get to how you do that, but this is showing up because there is a part of you that has formed an identity around that piece. This is the ego doing its best work. And this is why we can say, I don't want this pattern to show up. I don't want to feel this pain anymore. I don't want to be going through this again. And it can feel so uncomfortable, so painful, so frustrating, but it will continue to show up because often a part of us is identifying with that pain, is identifying or has formed an identity with that story of who we were, what we went through, what we experienced, who we were because of that, or who we've become because of that, or who we are now because of that. And so you also want to get curious around, what purpose is this pattern serving? Right? How is my identity? How is there a part of me that's identifying with this? What's the story that I have told about myself because of this? And even from there, what are the parts that formed that keep me safe in a lot of ways now? Because when this pattern shows up now, you want to start to get curious with, okay, what are the parts that show up? They might not even be parts that you like, parts of you, aspects of self, lowercase self, not capital S. I say capital S because this is like our higher self, our deeper self, the self that comes on, that's sort of like the grown parent, that's calm, compassionate, centered. This is Parts Work 101. If you have more questions about that, ask me, because I love explaining parts work. I could probably even do a video about it to help explain it a little bit more. There's a difference between our lowercase self and our uppercase self. Uppercase being like our higher self, our deeper self, the inner, compassionate, loving, connected parent. Lowercase is like these parts that formed when we were younger. They're often very young parts that we either learned to push away because they were too vulnerable and exile them out of our like into darker parts of our system, shadow, or they formed into protectors. And our protectors, oof, I love working with protectors because they're like our gatekeepers. And so when it comes to patterns, we want to get curious with what are the protectors that show up here? What are the protectors that show up that keep me safe, that have kept me safe, that formed from this experience, that are playing a role now to keep me safe, even though it doesn't necessarily feel good? So curiosity, so much curiosity. We want to get to the root. We want to understand where it comes from. We want to get to know the history, the historical energy of the pattern, okay? The origin story. And then we want to get to know, how does that play out now? How is this a cyclical piece that continues to play out now? What role does it play? What parts show up that play certain roles, that feel comfortable, that feel safe? Because patterns are familiar. They are these, I had the visual the other day of like these ropes that are tied tight within us. And when we start to want to change a pattern, it's like unraveling a really tightly wound rope. It takes time. It takes patience. And you're going to falter because these are tightly wound ropes that you've had your whole life. And so it's about unwinding, right? Working with your nervous system to unwind these patterns, these energetic patterns you have within yourself that have served a purpose your whole life. They've kept you safe. But if you're building awareness of them now, if you're getting to this place of being so sick of riding out these patterns, it means that they're ready to change. It means that a new pattern wants to come on. It means a new story wants to be told. You got to have patience in that process. The other piece I want to talk about here is when it comes to shifting out of patterns, one of the most important pieces involved. I am a firm believer that in order to create the greatest change in our patterns, it is a reciprocal relationship or reciprocal work we do in relationship with others. It's not necessarily just romantic partnership that we can learn how to change patterns, platonic as well. But the most important part that comes with the work we do in relationship with others is that there has to be a willingness from both sides. Why? Because anytime there is a relationship dynamic showing up, especially a pattern that is frustrating, that is uncomfortable, that is cyclical, that is, you're ready to shift out of, it means that there are two parts involved. Think of the saying, it takes two to tango. I believe that we can't actually fully shift out of our relationship patterns alone. We do it in relationship with others, right? If you take the example of like a romantic partnership, even if this is something you're healing from when you're younger with a parent, those are going to replay in your romantic relationship. Sorry, spoiler alert. Your greatest relationship patterns, especially romantic, started in childhood. And that might sound a little bit wild to you, but this is true. That's where we form our most basic, earliest attachments, is with our primary caregivers. Okay. And these are playing out now in your romantic relationships, in all of your relationships, but especially romantic. And so we do our best work when there is someone else. We have the most profound healing when we are working with another, especially in romantic relationships, in shifting out of the pattern, because both people have to be willing to show up to shift their own stuff. Because in any pattern, there are two energies dancing with each other, right? And it's almost like a perfect dance. And then when you start to shift yours, that's going to change the dance for the other person. And if they're not doing their own work, that's where either nothing is going to change or it's going to get way harder. And you're going to have to you're going to have some decisions that you're going to have to make about that relationship. When both people are doing the work and one person starts to shift, the other person then has awareness and tools and is determined or committed to figuring out, okay, the dance is changing here. That means that I have to shift my dance. There has to be a willingness on both sides. It doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that there aren't still going to be mistakes and there are still going to be things that show up in that pattern. But if both people are willing to show up each day and look at themselves in the mirror and get curious with what is their shit that's showing up. And then the other most important part, making new decisions, right? To finish that thought, if both people are willing to do that, that's how we have the greatest impact, the deepest healing in our relationships. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but both people have to be on that boat together to ride that wave. The final piece, new decisions. We fully are able to shift out of our patterns when we start to create a new response, when we start to write a new ending, right? If we go back to that old story, also, the reason why patterns repeat is because there is an old story playing over and over and over. Record player, right? You have to be able to change the ending. You have to be open to creating a new response, making a new decision, forming a new habit. This takes time. But that's actually how we begin to fully shift and clear out that old energy, is choosing a new way of showing up, choosing a new way of seeing that piece, choosing a new story to tell ourselves, showing up in new energy. That's such an important part of the equation. My friends, powerful, powerful codes that came through on that one. I'm so glad that I sat down and was able to share, because patterns are something I continually am, and I'm continually evolving through. Like, as humans, if you came here to do this work and to walk this path, understanding your patterns is going to be one of the greatest tools that you have in your toolkit, walking this path, this awakening path, this evolving, healing, expansion path. I also want to say before I finish, if you haven't seen, I have a spring reset sale promo going on right now for the month of April. I have 5 promos available, 30% off all my Akashic Record soul readings, as well as one of my specialty programs, which is my transformation program. It is a one-to-one coaching container, 9 sessions. If you're wanting to go deep in your life, this is the one for you. So I have 5 promos available, those 2 options. You can go to the link in my bio, check out everything there, use code SPRINGRESET, and I will talk to you soon.